Lovely to meet both of you. It's such an honor. I'm so excited to talk to you about this show. I mean, it was a fantastic experience watching it, even as an American who's not super familiar with, anything to do with British politics, much less the insanity that is this story. So
We didn't know anything about it either. Well, I didn't. Kevin did, but it's bonkers.
I did. I lived through the story,
Yeah.
So
I was going to ask if you had familiarity with it. I know, Matthew, you said you were quite young when it happened. So
I was born. Well, I was born in '74, which was the year that he did the deed, that he flew to Miami and left his clothes on the beach, the Shimmering Sands Hotel. Yeah, so I didn't know about it, but there was a story. There was a book which was made into a TV show with Leonard Rossiter called The Rise and Fall of Reginald Perrin, about a man who faked his own death and swam into the sea. That's right. That came afterwards, I think.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I think it was sort of inspired by it, I think.
Right, yeah. But I didn't know anything about Stonehouse.
Yeah. And I was curious, sort of in that sense, when you're playing a real person, because I know you both have done it in the past, obviously some things are dramatized for television or film or whatever. So how much research are you doing and how much are you just relying on what's on the page?
I don't know. I think I don't know whether you'd agree with this, but you sort of do as much research as you fancy, really, is the thing. I don't think you sort of, and it depends on the style of thing you're doing. So if it's a really realistic sort of story, I mean, if you're trying to depict it as accurately as possible, it's a different type of research, I suppose. But there always comes a point, and I haven't done it very much, but whenever I'm playing a real person, there's always a point I think, right, forget the real, I've just got to play the script, because you can't play the research, you can't play the real events, because you have to play the text, you have to play the story you're shooting. It's like reading the source novel of a screenplay of a classic. It's helpful up to a point, but you're shooting the script and not the novel.
Yes, I would say add to that in that, but I would say Stonehouse is actually, although it's sort of broad and absurd and it's very funny and it's a very well told story, it's actually closer to the true story than many things I've ever seen. In particular, I remember it came in for a great deal of criticism in The Name of the Father, and Emma Thompson's role as the defender, the ridiculous story they made up about her looking at park benches and stuff, when actually it was sheer dogged, boring police work that caught the Guildford Four, which was about the IRA bombers. And I've seen other shows that are based on true stories that do have some stretches of truth that I think, well, why do you need to do that? You might stay with the original story. And having narrated the complimentary documentary, The Real Stonehouse, for this, watch that, and you'll see that there really aren't any liberty. If anything, we've just left a load of stuff out there wasn't time for. But I don't see anything invented in it at all.
No.
Yeah. I mean, I read I did a deep dive. I read the Wikipedia page on John Stonehouse, and I was shocked at how sort of beat by beat everything is, which is obviously not something you see in sort of inspired by true story things. So
no, exactly. Yeah.
But is there any sort of difference, or is it more difficult to play a real person, do you think, than someone who's sort of wholly made up for the page, or is it, similar in that sense?
It's always a sort of weird, I don't know, sometimes you feel a weird sort of responsibility, and sometimes it's a slightly, I feel a sort of awkward feeling sometimes. But again, there's a jumping off point. You think, I can't worry about that. I have to just jump in and hope for the best and trust that the director and will tell the story in the right way. And also, by the time you get to day one of shooting, there's a lot of, you've got to have faith in the story. And a lot of work has been done a lot of legal work has been done to make sure you're not sort of, giving a false impression of someone's life story, or, because it's odd, because you're dealing with people whose relatives are still alive and all the rest of it. So it's a strange one sometimes.
It is a weird hybrid, really.
Yeah.
I felt, and I do think we've talked about this before, but I thought Matthew did really recreate John Stonehouse brilliantly. I felt that a little bit stronger because there's so much more footage of Harold Wilson, and he's so much more well known to English people. But fortunately, I had lived through my teenage years with him being prime minister, so he was well in there, So I didn't have to think about it too much, just do the scenes.
And Matthew, you worked with your wife, Keeley Hawes, on this, and I know you've worked together a couple of times before, but specifically for this project, because the characters are so intertwined, what was that like? Especially because you do get kind of battered by her. She does yell at you many times throughout the course of the couple episodes.
Yeah. We just had a really, really great time. We had a really nice time. Apart from anything else, just domestically, it was really nice to hang out. Usually we're scattered and, trying to sort of keep the plate spinning, but it was really nice to go to work together, sort of see each other.
Yeah, and you've also done, you did Quiz back in 2020, which is also sort of inspired by this sort of, I guess, to use the title of what the writer of this show is, but like a very British scandal. Is there something specifically that draws you to those projects, like the kind of based on a true story or anything, or is it just kind of coincidence?
Just pure good fortune that those scripts came through my door. That was just luck.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So is there anything particular that for either of you that draws you to a project, especially something like Stonehouse?
I think when you read a script, you think this is great. It's a visceral feeling of this is a great story. I could do something with this, and it's just in the writing. So often you can't. I sort of tore through John's script. It's so brilliantly written. It's so sort of light and funny and yet not sort of surface. It was a great thing to read.
I always say that if I can get past page 11 on the first reading, it's probably got a good chance.
Because it's true. If you read anything, life's too short.
You can usually tell within the first 10 pages if it's ready, really. Something might be good, but it might not be ready. It might need a lot more work. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that makes
sense. I read
sense.
Stonehouse in one sitting, and then I read it again.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. But I think
basically trying to search for scenes that I was in, more of bloody Matthew Macfadyen.
Yeah. Well, I think because it's a period drama, obviously. It's not sort of super far set back in the past. It's not 19th century, it's 1970s. So, when my parents were alive, obviously, when you guys were alive. So why do you think now is a good time to tell this story? I think it
might as well be like 1870. It's so different. Just the notion of just the reality of being able to disappear. It's inconceivable now. So it really, it sort of is a real period piece. Even going back to the 90s is a period piece. I did something a few years ago, and it was things have sort of changing so rapidly. I jumped in on the question. Sorry, it just struck me. Yeah,
it's fine. It's fine. I was thinking in terms of, especially, in terms of the idea of sort of evading, the truth, evading consequences, that does still strike very heavily today. Do you think sort of thematically it's, despite the fact that, it's the 70s and, everybody's in the polyester and the wigs and everything, that it does still strike pretty true?
Yeah, because I think the other side of what Matthew's saying is that people's interrelationships and what power and success does to people is the same generation to generation, really. I'm just still suffering from the fact that I was doing Chekhov at RADA when he was born. That's been really bearing on my mind, actually, since I said it.
Sorry. But you're right. Human behavior hasn't changed whether you're in a polyester suit or whether you've got a mobile and AirPods, and it's just, or you're in breeches and a horse, on a horse.
Yeah,
it's the same. It's the same stuff.
Yeah,
the same sort of petty vanities and pride and anger and love and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties back into my last question for you guys, which is sort of, other than the fact that truth is stranger than fiction, what are you hoping that people will take away from this story?
I hope they really enjoy it. I hope they have a really great time watching it. I think it's really funny and really interesting. So I hope that they're royally entertained, and also think a little bit about power and what it does to you.
Yeah,
You know.
I would agree totally with Matthew on that. It's primarily an entertainment, but an entertainment that is leached out of real events and real things that happened.
Well, I can say for certain that I absolutely had a blast watching it. So thank you guys so much.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Cheers.